In the previous two videos, we discussed several different ways to solve quadratic equations using different ways of factoring. Sometimes, when you have a quadratic equation, there is no simple way to actually factor it. So what do you do in those instances? Take, for example, 7x squared plus 13x plus 5 equals 0, and x squared plus 6x plus 10 equals 0. You may stare at those for a very long time before realizing, hey, maybe I just can't factor those. When that happens, we have a formula called the quadratic formula that we can use to solve those types of quadratic equations. The quadratic formula states that when you have a quadratic equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, that x is going to be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The term b squared minus 4ac in the quadratic formula is known as the discriminant. Why is that important? Well, when the discriminant is positive, the quadratic equation has two real roots. When the discriminant is negative, the quadratic equation has two imaginary roots. Let's apply the quadratic formula to the two equations we have above. So we have 7x squared plus 13x plus 5 equals 0. So now, if we plug in some values, we have x is equal to negative b, or negative 13 in this case, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 13 squared, minus 4 times a times c, or 4 times 7 times 5. And we take all of that over 2 times a, or 2 times 7. When we go to simplify this, we get x is equal to negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 29 all over 14. So if we're wanting to know what one of the roots is, we do negative 13 plus root 29 over 14, and the other root is going to be negative 13 minus the square root of 29 over 14. As you can see from that example, there's no way you would have been able to figure that out with factoring. That's why we use the quadratic formula. Let's do the other example. X squared plus 6x plus 10 equals 0. So we have x is equal to negative b, or negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 10, all over 2a, which is 2 times 1. When we simplify this, we get x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 all over 2. We can simplify that further, and we'll get negative 6 plus or minus 2i over 2. And then we can simplify that further into negative 3 plus or minus I.